The morning light filtered through the large windows of the military academy classroom on Kepler Station. Commander Zixathala stood at the front of the room, his forearms clasped behind his back as he watched the young cadets file in. The scars across his face and arms told stories of battles fought long ago, when the galaxy was a much different place. Zixathala was old now, older than most of his kind lived to be. His blue-green skin had faded with age, and his once sharp claws had grown dull. But his eyes still held the fire of a warrior, and his mind remained as sharp as the day he first picked up a weapon 50 years ago. The cadets took their seats, a mix of species from across the galaxy. There were tall, thin Altarians with their silver skin and large eyes. Stocky Kronan warriors sat next to graceful, ethereal beings who seemed to float rather than walk. Young Vorthons like himself filled several rows, their forearms making it easy to spot them in the crowd. Today's class was different from the usual tactical studies. Today, Zixathala would share stories from the war that changed everything. The war that no one talks about anymore except in whispers and warnings. A young Altarian cadet named Nim'ara raised her hand. Her silver skin gleamed in the classroom, light as she spoke. "Commander, we have studied many famous battles in our classes. We learned about the Great Siege of Andromeda and the Battle of the Twin Suns, but there is one war that our teachers never talk about in detail: the war against the humans." A hush fell over the classroom. Several cadets shifted in their seats. The human war was something everyone knew about, but few dared to discuss openly. It was a wound that had healed on the surface but still hurt deep inside. Zixathala nodded slowly. He had been waiting for this question for years. Every class asked, eventually, and every time he gave the same answer, but today felt different. Today he was ready to tell the whole truth. "The human war," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You want to know about the humans?" He walked to the center of the classroom, his clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. "Before I begin, you must understand something. Everything I am going to tell you happened exactly as I say. I was there. I fought in that war from the first battle to the last day. I saw things that still wake me up at night." Nim'ara leaned forward in her seat. "Commander, we were told that humans were primitive when they first joined the galactic community. Their technology was basic and their military was weak. How could they possibly challenge the coalition?" Zixathala smiled, but there was no joy in it. "That is exactly what we thought, and that thinking nearly destroyed us all." He moved to the large display screen at the front of the room and activated. Its star maps appeared, showing the galaxy as it was 50 years ago. When humans first made contact with galactic civilization, we welcomed them as we welcome all new species. They seemed harmless enough. Their ships were slow and clumsy compared to ours. Their weapons were simple projectile-based systems that could barely scratch our shields. The display changed to show human ships from that time period. They looked primitive compared to the sleek coalition vessels shown alongside them. We offered them membership in the coalition, as was our custom. They would contribute resources and labor, and in return they would receive protection and technology. A Kronan cadet spoke up. "That sounds fair, Commander. Why did they refuse?" "They did not refuse at first," Zixathala replied. "The negotiations went on for months. But humans, we learned, ask questions that other species do not ask. They wanted to know who made the decisions in the coalition. They wanted to understand why some species contributed more than others. They asked why certain worlds were restricted to coalition members only." The commander paused, remembering those early diplomatic meetings. "At first we thought they were simply curious. Most new species ask many questions, but humans kept asking the same questions over and over in different ways. They wanted details about everything." "What kind of details?" asked a young ethereal cadet. "They wanted to know how coalition laws were made. They wanted to see the voting records of the council. They asked for detailed reports on resource distribution and military deployments. When we told them that such information was classified, they asked why." Zixathala activated another display, showing a conference room where diplomats from many species sat around a large table, The negotiations began to break down when humans started proposing changes to coalition law. They suggested that all member species should have equal voting rights, regardless of how long they had been members. They wanted resource allocation to be based on need rather than contribution levels. Several cadets exchanged glances. These ideas sounded reasonable to them, but they could see why the established coalition powers might have been concerned. The final break came when the human ambassador, a woman named Ellen Davis, stood up in the middle of a council session and said something that no one had ever said before. Zixthala's voice grew quiet. She said that the coalition was not a partnership of equals, but a system designed to keep power in the hands of the oldest and strongest species. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the air recycling system seemed to have stopped humming. Ambassador Davis was asked to leave the council chambers. Zixthala continued. The human delegation was given 72 hours to accept the coalition's standard membership terms or leave coalition space forever. What did they do? Nimara asked, though she already knew the answer. They left, Zixthala said simply. But before they went, Ambassador Davis made one final statement. She said that humans would remember who had been fair to them and who had not. She said that if the coalition ever threatened human worlds or human people, they would defend themselves. The commander turned off the display and faced his students. Directly. We laughed at her. The entire council chamber erupted in laughter. How could these primitive newcomers possibly threaten the most powerful military alliance in galactic history? He moved to his desk and picked up a small, scarred piece of metal. This is a fragment from my first command ship, the Endless Victory. It was a coalition destroyer, one of the finest ships in the fleet. I was young then, proud of my position and confident in coalition superiority. Zixthala held up the metal fragment so all the cadets could see it. This piece of metal is all that remains of that ship. It was destroyed in the first major battle of the human war, at a place called Proxima Ridge. A Vorthan cadet raised 2 of his arms. Commander, how could humans destroy coalition ships with their primitive weapons? That is the question that kept me awake for years, Zixthala replied. Their weapons were not more powerful than ours. Their ships were not faster or stronger. But they fought in ways that we did not understand. Ways that made no sense according to everything we had learned about warfare. He sat down on the edge of his desk, suddenly looking very tired. The first attacks came without warning. Human ships appeared in coalition space and struck military targets with precision that should have been impossible. They hit supply depots, communication relays, and isolated patrol ships. Then they vanished before our response fleets could arrive. But Commander, said a Cronin cadet, that sounds like standard guerrilla tactics. Many species have used such methods, Zixthala nodded. Yes, but humans did not use them the way others did. When the Zathari rebellion used guerrilla tactics, they followed predictable patterns. We could analyze their strikes and predict where they would hit next. But humans, they seemed to have no pattern at all. The old commander stood up and began, pacing again. They would attack a major shipyard one day, then strike a small research station on the other side of the galaxy the next day. Sometimes they hit the same target twice in a row. Sometimes they ignored obvious targets and attacked places that seemed to have no strategic value. It sounds like they were just being random, suggested an ethereal cadet. That is what we thought at first, Zixthala said. But after months of these attacks, we began to realize something terrible. They were not being random at all, they were learning. Every attack taught them something new about our defenses, our response times, our tactics. They were using the entire galaxy as a training ground. The commander stopped pacing and looked out the window at the stars beyond. By the time we understood what they were doing, it was too late. The real war was about to begin, and we were not prepared for what humans could do when they stopped holding back. He turned back to his students, his scarred face grave. Tomorrow, I will tell you about Proxima Ridge, where I learned that everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong. The next morning, Commander Zixthala arrived at the classroom earlier than usual. He had spent the night thinking about Proxima Ridge, about the battle that changed everything he thought he knew. The memories were still fresh, after all these years, as clear as if they had happened yesterday. The cadets filed in quietly, sensing that today would be different. Word had spread through the academy about yesterday's lesson, and several instructors had quietly joined the back of the classroom. Everyone wanted to hear about the human war from someone who had actually fought in it. Nimara raised her hand as soon as she sat down. "Commander, you said yesterday that humans fought in ways that made no sense. What did you mean?" Zixathala activated the display screen, showing a three-dimensional map of a star system. A small planet appeared in the center, surrounded by asteroid, fields, and mining stations. "This is Proxima Ridge, a mining colony on the edge of Coalition space. It was not an important world, just a place where we dug metals from the ground and sent them back to the core worlds." He pointed to the planet, with one of his 4 arms. The colony had about 50,000 workers from different species. Most were miners, but there were also engineers, doctors, and their families. The planet also had a small Coalition military base with 200 soldiers. The display zoomed in to show the military base, a simple structure built into the side of a mountain. When the human war began, High Command decided that Proxima Ridge would be an easy target for humans to attack. The base was small and far from help. If humans took it, they would gain access to valuable mining equipment and supplies. A Cronin cadet leaned forward. "So the Coalition used it as bait?" "Exactly," Zixathala nodded. "We reinforced the base with a full battalion. That is about 800 soldiers plus heavy weapons and air support. We also stationed 3 destroyers in orbit, including my ship, the Endless Victory." The commander's expression grew dark as he continued. "The plan was simple. When humans attacked the base, we would let them get close, then crush them between the ground forces and the orbital bombardment. It would be a quick victory that would show other worlds what happened to those who opposed the Coalition." He paused, looking at each of his students. "But humans did not attack the base." "What did they do?" asked an ethereal cadet. "For 3 weeks nothing happened. Our sensors showed no human ships in the system. No attacks on mining stations, no raids on supply convoys. The miners went about their work as usual. The soldiers grew bored and began to think the humans had decided Proxima Ridge was not worth the risk." Zixathala changed the display to show underground tunnels spreading beneath the planet's surface. "What we did not know was that humans had been on Proxima Ridge for months before the war even started. They had come as miners, engineers, and traders. They looked just like any other workers doing their jobs and causing no trouble." The old commander's voice grew quiet. "On the morning of the 4th week, I was having breakfast in my quarters when the first explosion happened." The display showed the Coalition base, then simulated a series of underground explosions that caused parts of the structure to collapse. The humans had not attacked from above. They had been below us the entire time, using the mining tunnels to place explosives under every important building in the base. Several cadets gasped. This was not how wars were supposed to be fought. But that was only the beginning. Zixathala continued. As our soldiers rushed to help their trapped comrades, more explosions went off. The humans had turned the entire tunnel system into a trap. Every main passage had been rigged with explosives. Every emergency exit led to an ambush. He activated a recording, showing grainy footage from a Coalition soldier's helmet camera. The soldier was running through a tunnel when the walls suddenly exploded inward, filling the passage with dust and debris. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Carter was the human commander on Proxima Ridge. We learned his name later, when we studied the battle reports. He had been working as a mining supervisor for 8 months before the war started. During that time, he mapped every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every air vent in the entire colony. The display showed a complex network of passages, color-coded, to show which ones humans controlled and which were still contested. Carter's people did not just know the tunnels, they had improved them. They cut new passages between existing ones. They installed hidden supply caches and communication equipment. They turned a simple mining operation into a 3-dimensional fortress. A young Vorthan cadet raised 2 arms. But Commander, how could they do all this without anyone noticing? That is what made it so terrifying, Zixathala replied. They did it openly in front of everyone, When coalition supervisors asked why they were digging new tunnels, the humans said they were improving mining efficiency. When they brought in extra equipment, they said it was for safety improvements. When they worked extra shifts, they said they wanted to meet their quotas early. The commander turned away from the display and faced his students directly. We were so sure that we understood human behavior that we never questioned their explanations. We thought we knew what they were capable of, so we did not look for signs of what they were actually doing. How long did the battle last? Asked Nimara. 17 days, Zixthala said. 17 days of fighting an enemy we could not see in tunnels we did not understand. Every time our soldiers thought they had cleared a section, humans would appear behind them from passages we did not know existed. The display showed tactical maps with red and blue markers moving through the tunnel system. The blue coalition markers seemed to move randomly, while the red human markers flowed like water through the underground maze. On the third day, Major Kate Sullivan contacted us from orbit, Zixthala continued. She was the human intelligence officer who had been working as a communications technician in the colony. She offered to discuss surrender terms. The humans wanted to surrender? Asked a Cronin cadet. No, Zixthala said grimly. She wanted us to surrender. The classroom fell silent. The idea of a tiny human force demanding the surrender of a full coalition battle group was beyond what any of them could imagine. General Mordak, my commanding officer, was so angry that he ordered an immediate orbital bombardment of the entire colony. He said we would turn the planet into glass, rather than let humans make fools of us. The display showed the 3 coalition destroyers in orbit, their weapons charging for a full-scale attack. But when we tried to target the colony, our sensors could not get a clear lock. The humans had somehow scattered reflective particles throughout the atmosphere. Our targeting, computers kept getting false readings. While we were trying to recalibrate our weapons, something impossible happened, Zixthala continued. Human ships appeared in the system. Not just 1 or 2 ships, but an entire fleet. They had somehow gotten past our perimeter sensors without being detected. The display showed dozens of human vessels emerging from what looked like empty space. Later, we learned that they had been hiding in the asteroid fields for weeks, using modified mining equipment to mask their heat signatures. While we were focused on the planet below, they had been moving into attack position above us. A young ethereal cadet spoke up. But Commander, even if they surprised you, coalition ships were still more powerful than human vessels. That is what we thought, Zixthala replied. But humans did not fight ship-to-ship battles the way we expected. Instead of engaging us, directly they targeted our supply ships and communication relays. They used small, fast ships to hit us from multiple directions at once. He paused, remembering the chaos of that battle. Commander Rick Thompson led the human fleet. His ships moved in patterns that made no tactical sense. They would attack, retreat, then attack again from a completely different angle. Our gunners could not predict where they would be next. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, the situation was getting worse. Colonel Ben Carter's forces had taken control of all the mining equipment, including the heavy excavators and ore processors. They were using industrial equipment as weapons, turning mining lasers into ship killers and excavator arms into missile launchers. The display showed modified mining equipment emerging from hidden positions to attack coalition dropships trying to land reinforcements. On the 7th day, we lost the endless victory, Zixthala said quietly. A human ship no bigger than a shuttle somehow got close enough to attach mining charges to our hull. The explosion did not destroy us immediately, but it damaged our life support systems beyond repair. He touched the scarred metal fragment on his desk. I was in the engineering section when the charges went off. The blast threw me against a bulkhead and left me with these scars. 43 of my crew died in that explosion. The old commander was quiet for a long moment before continuing. The evacuation pods were ready to launch when Major Kate Sullivan contacted us again. She said that human medical teams were standing by to treat coalition wounded. She promised that any coalition soldiers who surrendered would be given proper medical care and returned home safely after the war. Did you surrender? Asked Nimara. I wanted to, Zixthala admitted. My ship was dying, my crew was injured, and we were completely outmatched. But General Mordak ordered us to fight to the death rather than accept help from humans. Commander Zixthala walked slowly to the front of the classroom, his steps heavier than usual. The other instructors who had been listening from the back of the room had spread word throughout the academy. Today, even more faces filled the doorway, eager to hear about the battle that had broken something inside the old warrior. He stood quietly for several minutes, staring out at the stars through the large windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Haven Colony was different from Proxima Ridge. It was not a military target or a mining operation. It was home to 3 million beings from 47 different species. Families lived there. Children went to school there. Old people sat in parks and fed the local birds. The display screen activated, showing a beautiful world covered in green forests and blue oceans. Cities dotted the landscape, connected by rivers and transportation networks. It looked peaceful, like a place where people could live good lives. The colony had been established 200 years before the human war began, Zixthala continued. It was one of the Coalition's greatest success stories. Species that had once been enemies worked together, building something better than any of them could have created alone. Nimara raised her hand carefully. Commander, if it was just a civilian colony, why did the Coalition attack it? We did not attack it, Zixthala replied. Humans chose to defend it. The display changed to show orbital installations around the planet. Military stations and weapon platforms formed a protective ring in space. After Proxima Ridge, Coalition High Command decided that we needed to control key worlds to prevent humans from using them as bases. Haven Colony was chosen because of its location near major shipping routes. A Cronin cadet spoke up. But if it was full of civilians, surely the humans would not risk a battle there. Zixthala turned to face his students, and they could see deep sadness in his old eyes. That is exactly what we thought. Coalition strategy was simple. We would surround the planet and demand surrender. The human forces there would have to choose between fighting and putting millions of innocent lives at risk, or abandoning the system peacefully. What happened when you arrived? Asked an ethereal cadet. The human response surprised everyone, Zixthala said. Commander Rick Thompson was in charge of the small human fleet protecting Haven Colony. When our ships arrived, he sent a message to Coalition Command. He said that humans would fight to defend Haven Colony, but they wanted all civilian populations to be evacuated first. The old commander activated a recording. The voice that came through the speakers was calm and clear, speaking in perfect Coalition standard language. This is Commander Rick Thompson of the Human Defense Force. We recognize your right to control this system under Coalition law. However, we cannot allow you to occupy it while civilian populations remain at risk. We propose a 30-day ceasefire to allow complete evacuation of all non-military personnel. After that, we will engage your forces in open battle. Several cadets exchanged glances. This was not how military conflicts usually worked. General Mordak was still in command of Coalition forces, Zixthala continued. He was furious that humans would dare to dictate terms to him. He refused the ceasefire and ordered an immediate assault on the planet. The display showed Coalition ships moving into attack formation, while smaller human vessels positioned themselves between the fleet and the planet below. The siege of Haven Colony lasted 4 months, Zixthala said, but it was unlike any siege in galactic history. Both sides were trying to protect the same people. I do not understand, said a young Vorthan cadet. Dr. Amy Foster was the chief medical officer for human forces on Haven Colony, Zixthala explained. When the fighting began, she established field hospitals that treated wounded from both sides. Coalition soldiers who were injured in battle were given the same care as human soldiers. The display showed medical facilities with the symbols of multiple species displayed prominently outside. Dr. Foster sent a message to all Coalition commanders. She said that her medical teams would treat any wounded Coalition personnel. No questions asked. All they had to do was request help. Did anyone accept? Asked Nimara. At first, no, Zixthala replied. Coalition doctrine forbade accepting help from enemy forces, but as the fighting continued and casualties mounted, some commanders began to quietly send their wounded to human medical facilities. The old commander moved to his desk and picked up a small medical device. "This is a human medical scanner that Dr. Foster gave to me after the battle. My ship had been damaged again, and several of my crew were badly injured. Our own medical supplies were running low." He held the device carefully as if it were made of precious metal. "I had been fighting humans for months. I had seen them as dangerous enemies who threatened everything the Coalition stood for. But when my communications officer was dying from radiation poisoning, Dr. Foster personally came aboard my ship to save his life." The classroom was completely silent. Even the instructors in the back had stopped whispering among themselves. "She spent 6 hours in surgery, working to repair damage that our own doctor said was hopeless," Zixthala continued. "When she was done, she left behind enough medical supplies to treat my entire crew. She asked for nothing in return except that I promised to get my people proper medical care when the battle was over." "But Commander," said a Cronin cadet, "humans were still your enemies. Why would they help Coalition wounded?" "That is what I asked Dr. Foster," Zixthala replied. Her answer changed everything I thought I knew about humans and about war itself. He activated another recording. This time, the voice was that of a tired woman speaking with the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering. "Commander Zixthala, we are not fighting your people because we hate them. We are fighting because we believe that all beings have the right to choose their own path. The Coalition system denies that right to new species and weaker worlds. We cannot accept that, but we also cannot accept innocent people dying for political decisions they did not make. Dr. Foster told me that humans had studied Coalition law and history for decades before the war began," Zixthala said. "They knew that most Coalition species had joined because they had no choice, not because they believed in Coalition ideals." The display showed statistics and charts comparing different species' contributions to the Coalition versus the benefits they received. The numbers painted a clear picture of inequality. Captain Zara Kim commanded the human ground forces on Haven Colony. Zixthala continued. She was fighting against Coalition Marines who were trying to establish landing zones on the planet. But when an earthquake damaged one of the civilian refugee centers, Kim's forces stopped their attacks and helped with rescue operations. For 3 days, human and Coalition soldiers worked side by side, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings and providing emergency shelter, he said. Captain Kim personally coordinated the rescue effort, organizing teams that included soldiers from both sides. A young ethereal cadet raised her hand. "Did the fighting stop during the rescue?" "Officially, no," Zixthala replied. "But in practice, yes. Nobody wanted to be the first to resume shooting while rescue workers were still searching for survivors." The commander moved closer to his students, his voice growing more intense. "On the 15th day of the rescue operation, something happened that made me question everything I believed about the Coalition cause. A Coalition supply ship carrying medical equipment was attacked by pirates while trying to reach Haven Colony. The ship sent out a distress call, but the nearest Coalition vessels could not reach them in time. Commander Rick Thompson heard the distress call and immediately sent human ships to help. They drove off the pirates and escorted the Coalition supply ship safely to Haven Colony. The medical supplies on that ship saved hundreds of Coalition lives." Several cadets looked shocked. The idea of enemies helping each other during a war was completely outside their understanding of military conflict. "When I asked General Mordak why humans would help us, he said it was obviously a trick," Zixthala continued. "He believed that humans were trying to make us lower our guard so they could strike a more devastating blow later. But Captain Kim sent a message explaining the real reason," he said, activating another recording. "General Mordak, we helped your supply ship because people were dying and we had the power to prevent it. Human forces will continue to defend Haven Colony against military targets, but we will not allow civilians or medical personnel to suffer because of our conflict. We hope that Coalition forces will show the same restraint." The siege continued for 3 more months, Zixthala said, but it was no longer a normal military operation. Both sides were fighting while trying to protect the same civilian population. Human medics treated Coalition wounded, Coalition engineers helped repair civilian infrastructure damaged by the fighting. By the end of the 4th month, something incredible had happened, he continued. Soldiers from both sides were talking to each other during temporary ceasefires. They shared pictures of their families and talked about what they hoped to do after the war. The display showed images of human and coalition soldiers sitting together during a break in the fighting, sharing food and stories. Commander Zix Thala entered the classroom to find it packed beyond capacity. Word about his stories had spread throughout the entire academy. Cadets sat in the aisles, stood along the walls, and crowded around the doorway. Even senior officers had come to listen, their faces grave as they waited to hear about the battle that changed the course of the war. The old commander looked out at the sea of faces, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy. Many of these beings had grown up in the peace that followed the human war, but they needed to understand how that peace had been won. Titan Station, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The largest shipyard in Coalition, space, a construction facility so massive that it could build 50 warships at the same time. It was our greatest industrial achievement and the backbone of Coalition military power. The display screen showed an enormous structure floating in space, surrounded by dozens of smaller stations and defense platforms. Ships in various stages of construction filled the massive bays, while thousands of workers moved between the different sections. After Haven Colony, Coalition High Command realized that the war was not going as planned. Zix Thala continued. Humans were not being defeated by superior firepower. Instead, they were winning hearts and minds throughout Coalition space. Something had to be done to end the conflict quickly. A young Altarian cadet raised her hand. Commander, why was Titan Station so important to ending the war? Because it was where we built our ships, Zix Thala replied. If humans could destroy or capture Titan Station, the Coalition would lose the ability to replace our losses. The war would be over within months. The display zoomed in to show the station's defenses. Massive weapon platforms surrounded the facility, while patrol ships moved in constant patterns around the perimeter. Titan Station was considered impossible to attack, Zix Thala said. It was protected by the most advanced shields in the galaxy. The weapons platforms could destroy an entire fleet before enemy ships got close enough to cause damage. The facility was surrounded by asteroid fields that made surprise attacks nearly impossible. But humans did not see impossible, he continued. They saw a challenge. The commander moved to the center of the room, his scarred face serious. Admiral Sam Rodriguez commanded the human fleet that approached Titan Station. Intelligence reports said he had only 30 ships, facing a defensive force of over 200 Coalition vessels plus the station's own weapons. Those are terrible odds, said a Cronin cadet. How could 30 ships hope to defeat such a force? That is exactly what we thought, Zix Thala replied. But humans had spent months studying Titan Station from a distance. They knew things about our facility that we did not know ourselves. The display changed to show detailed scans of the station's structure, with technical specifications and structural analysis covering every section. Engineer Tony Walsh had been working with Admiral Rodriguez for weeks before the attack, Zix Thala continued. Walsh was a specialist in industrial construction who had studied Coalition building techniques for years. He understood how Titan Station had been built and where its weak points were located. But knowing weak points is not the same as being able to reach them, pointed out an ethereal cadet. True, Zix Thala nodded. Which is why humans did not attack Titan Station the way we expected them to. The display showed the human fleet approaching in what appeared to be a standard battle formation. Coalition defenders moved to meet them, confident in their numerical superiority. When the battle began, it looked like a normal space engagement, Zix Thala said. Admiral Rodriguez's ships engaged our perimeter defenses while staying well outside the range of Titan Station's main weapons. Our commanders thought humans were trying to draw our fleet away from the station so they could attack it separately. Was that their plan? Asked Nimara. No, Zix Thala replied. Their real plan was far more clever than that. The display zoomed in to show several human ships that looked different from the others. They were smaller and moved in unusual patterns, staying close to the asteroid field surrounding the station. While Admiral Rodriguez kept our attention focused on the main battle, Engineer Walsh's modified ships were doing something that nobody had ever tried before, Zixthala continued. They were cutting through Titan Station itself. Several cadets looked confused. Cutting through it? Asked a Vorthan student. Walsh had taken standard mining equipment and modified it for use in space, Zixthala explained. The same laser cutters that humans use to slice through asteroids were powerful enough to cut through Titan Station's hull. But instead of attacking the heavily armored outer sections, they were cutting through the internal support structures. The display showed cross-sections of the station with red lines indicating where the human cutting beams had penetrated. The lines went deep into the facility, targeting power conduits, life support systems, and structural supports. Coalition engineers had designed Titan Station to resist external attacks, Zixthala said. The outer armor could stop the most powerful weapons in our arsenal, but the internal structure was built for efficiency, not defense. Walsh's teams were attacking the station from the inside out. How did they get close enough to do that? Asked a Cronin cadet. By hiding in plain sight, Zixthala replied. The human cutting ships were disguised as mining vessels. Our sensors showed them as civilian craft working in the asteroid fields. We ignored them completely while they moved into position. The old commander paused, remembering the moment when coalition forces realized what was happening. I was aboard the command ship Eternal Wisdom when the first reports came in, he said. Station engineers reported power failures in sections 7 through 12. Then life support went down in the main construction bays. Within minutes, entire sections of Titan Station were shutting down. Could you not just repair the damage? Asked an ethereal cadet. That was what we tried to do, Zixthala replied. But Engineer Walsh had planned his cuts very carefully. Every system he damaged was connected to 3 others. When repair teams fixed one problem, 2 more systems would fail. The display showed a complex diagram of the station's internal systems, with failure cascades spreading throughout the facility like a disease. While our engineers were trying to save Titan Station, Admiral Rodriguez made his real move, Zixthala continued. The main human fleet stopped engaging our perimeter defenses and headed straight for the station at maximum speed. But the weapon platforms were still operational, protested a young Vorthan cadet. Some of them were, Zixthala agreed. But without full power from the station's main reactors, they could not fire at maximum strength. And without the central command system, they could not coordinate their attacks effectively. The display showed the human fleet racing through gaps in the defensive fire, taking damage but continuing toward their target. Colonel Lisa Park commanded the human ground forces that boarded Titan Station, Zixthala said. Her Marines came through the holes that Walsh's teams had cut in the hull. They did not have to fight through heavily defended docking bays or airlocks. They appeared inside the station in dozens of different locations at the same time. How long did the battle for the station last? Asked Nimara. 6 hours, Zixthala replied quietly. 6 hours to capture a facility that coalition strategists said could hold out for months. The classroom was completely silent. The idea that humans could take the coalition's greatest shipyard in less than a day was almost impossible to believe. But the real shock came when we learned what humans planned to do with Titan Station, Zixthala continued. We expected them to destroy it or use it to build their own ships. Instead, Admiral Rodriguez sent a message to Coalition High Command. He activated a recording and a calm voice filled the room. This is Admiral Sam Rodriguez of the Human Defense Force. Titan Station is now under human control. However, we have no intention of destroying this facility or using it against coalition forces. Instead, we propose to use it as a neutral construction site where ships can be built for peaceful purposes. All coalition personnel currently aboard the station will be released unharmed. Any coalition species that wishes to continue working here will be welcome to do so under human administration. We believe that this facility can serve as a symbol of cooperation rather than conflict. Several cadets exchanged glances. This was not how military victories were supposed to work. Coalition High Command rejected the offer immediately, Zixthala said. But individual coalition species began to respond differently. The Altarians were the first to send a delegation to negotiate with human administrators. The Ethereals followed within weeks. Why? asked a Cronin cadet. Because humans offered them something the Coalition never had. Zixthala replied. Equal. Partnership. Every species that worked at Titan Station under human administration had the same rights and responsibilities. Decisions were made by vote, rather than by decree, from Coalition leadership. The display showed the station continuing to operate under human control, with ships from multiple species being constructed in the massive bays. Within 3 months, half the Coalition's member species had established diplomatic relations with human administrators at Titan Station, Zixthala continued. Commander Zixthala stood at the window, watching ships from dozens of different species dock at Kepler Station. Human vessels worked alongside Vorthon cruisers and Altarian science ships. The sight still amazed him after all these years. Enemies had become allies, and former battlefields had become meeting places for peaceful cooperation. The classroom was fuller than ever for this final lesson. Academy commandants from other star systems had arrived overnight to hear the conclusion of the story. News reporters waited outside, hoping to record the words of one of the last living veterans of the human war. The war ended not with a great battle, but with a conversation, Zixthala began, turning back to face his audience. It happened here, on this very station, in a conference room 3 levels below where we sit now. The display screen showed Kepler Station as it had been 50 years ago, smaller and less advanced than the current structure. Ships from the Coalition and human forces floated nearby, their weapons powered down but crews still tense with uncertainty. After Titan Station, Coalition High Command knew that military victory was no longer possible. Zixthala continued. Too many member species had begun questioning Coalition authority. Some were openly supporting human positions on equality and representation. The old order was cracking apart. A young ethereal cadet raised her hand. Commander, how did the peace talks begin? With an unexpected visitor, Zixthala replied. Admiral Jake Morrison, the human fleet commander, requested permission to meet with Coalition leadership under a flag of truce. He came alone, in a small shuttle, carrying only a data pad and a message of hope. The old commander activated a recording, and a strong, confident voice filled the room. I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Defense Force. I come not to demand surrender, but to offer partnership. The human people believe that all species deserve the right to determine their own future. We propose an end to this conflict and the beginning of a new kind of galactic community. Admiral Morrison was not what Coalition leaders expected, Zixthala said. He was older than most military commanders, with gray hair and kind eyes. He spoke softly but with great conviction about his vision for peace. The display showed the conference room where the first meetings took place. Representatives from multiple species sat around a circular table, with Admiral Morrison at one end, and Coalition leaders at the other. The talks almost failed before they began, Zixthala continued. General Mordak demanded that humans surrender unconditionally and accept standard Coalition membership terms. He said the war had caused too much damage for any other solution. What did Admiral Morrison say? Asked Nimara. He asked a simple question that changed everything, Zixthala replied. He asked each Coalition representative to explain why their species had originally joined the Coalition, and whether they felt their needs were still being met. The old commander paused, remembering the uncomfortable silence that had filled the room after that question. One by one, the Coalition representatives admitted that their species had joined because they had no choice, not because they believed in Coalition ideals, he said. The Altarians spoke about being forced to choose between membership and economic isolation. The Ethereals described how their peaceful nature had been taken advantage of by more aggressive species. Even my own people, the Vorthons, admitted that we had joined the Coalition mainly because we feared being conquered if we remained independent. Zixthala continued. Admiral Morrison listened to each story without judgment, then made an offer that surprised everyone. The display showed a document with signatures from multiple species. The Galactic Cooperation Accord, Zixthala said, a completely new form of interstellar government based on equal representation and mutual respect. How is it different from the Coalition? Asked a Cronin cadet. In every possible way, Zixthala replied. Under the Accord, each member species, would have one vote in the Galactic Council, regardless of their size or how long they had been members. Decisions would be made by majority vote, with protections for minority rights. No species could be forced to follow policies that violated their fundamental beliefs. Most importantly, he continued, membership would be completely voluntary. Any species could leave the Accord at any time, and any species could join by simply agreeing to respect the rights of others. Several cadets looked skeptical. But, Commander, said a young Vorthan, how could such a system work? What would stop stronger species from dominating weaker ones? That is exactly what coalition leaders asked, Zixthala replied. Admiral Morrison's answer was simple but profound. He said that any system based on fear and domination would eventually destroy itself, as the coalition was already doing. Only a system based on trust and cooperation could survive in the long term. The display changed to show the signing ceremony for the Galactic Cooperation Accord. Representatives from dozens of species put their names to the document while cameras recorded the historic moment. The ceremony took place 6 months after Admiral Morrison's first visit to Kepler Station, Zixthala said. By then, 43 coalition species had agreed to join the new government. Only the old coalition leadership and a few loyal species refused to participate. What happened to them? Asked an Altarian cadet. They were allowed to continue governing their own worlds as they saw fit, Zixthala replied. The Accord guaranteed their independence even though they chose not to join. Some of them eventually changed their minds and joined years later. Others preferred to remain independent, and that choice was respected. The old commander moved closer to his students, his voice growing warmer. The real test of the new system came during the first crisis. A plague struck several ethereal worlds, threatening to spread throughout their entire species. Under the old coalition system, help would have been slow and conditional. Resources would have been allocated based on political considerations rather than need. But under the Accord, every member species immediately offered assistance, he continued. Human medical teams worked alongside Altarian researchers and Vorthan engineers to develop treatments. The plague was stopped within months and not a single world was lost. That was when I truly understood what humans had been fighting for, Zixthala said. They had not wanted to conquer the galaxy or destroy the coalition. They had wanted to create something better for everyone. The display showed current images of Kepler Station, bustling with activity as beings from across the galaxy worked together on scientific research, trade negotiations, and cultural exchanges. 50 years later, the Galactic Accord has grown to include over 200 species, Zixthala said. New worlds join every year, attracted by the promise of equality and self-determination. Old conflicts have been resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. A door at the back of the classroom opened, and a figure entered quietly. Commander Zixthala's scarred face broke into a rare smile as he recognized his visitor. Students, I would like you to meet someone, he said. This is Admiral Jake Morrison, retired, but still one of the wisest beings in the galaxy. The elderly human walked slowly to the front of the room, his hair now completely white, but his eyes still bright with intelligence and kindness. He moved, with the careful steps of someone who had lived a long and eventful life. Admiral Morrison visits the Academy every year to speak with new cadets, Zixthala explained. He and I have become good friends over the decades, despite the fact that we once tried to kill each other in battle. Admiral Morrison smiled and nodded to the assembled students. Commander Zixthala has told you about the war from his perspective, he said, his voice still strong despite his age. I hope you understand that there were no heroes or villains in that conflict, only beings trying to do what they thought was right. The real victory was not military, Morrison continued. It was moral. We learned that former enemies could become friends, that competition could become cooperation, and that diversity could become strength. Nimara raised her hand carefully. Admiral Morrison, what advice would you give to young military officers today? The old human was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Remember that the goal of any military force should be to make itself unnecessary, he said finally. Fight when you must, but always look for ways to build peace, rather than simply win battles. The galaxy we live in today exists because beings from different species chose to trust each other instead of fearing each other. Morrison added, that trust must be earned and maintained every day. It is the most important duty any of us have. Commander Zixathala nodded in agreement. Your assignment for the rest of your time at this academy is simple, he told his students. Learn everything you can about the species you will work with in the future. Understand their histories, their cultures, their hopes and fears. The more you know about your allies, the stronger your alliance will become. But most importantly, he continued, remember that every conflict offers a choice. You can fight to destroy your enemies, or you can fight to create something better for everyone. Choose wisely, because your choice will determine what kind of galaxy your children inherit. Admiral Morrison stepped forward one last time.